Welcome to the show. And a really special shout out to our listener today, the learner. So imagine you're sitting down at this beautiful dinner table in Helsinki, Finland.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right? The meal is exquisite, the company is pleasant, but nobody has spoken a single word for like 10 agonizing minutes. I mean, if you're an American, your brain is probably just screaming at that point.
Oh, absolutely. You're assuming everyone is angry, the evening is a total disaster, and, these people must hate each other.
Exactly. But if you're Finnish, you are having the time of your life just enjoying a comfortable, thoughtful silence.
Yeah, it is entirely a matter of invisible programming. I mean, back in the 1960s, theorists like Marshall McLuhan predicted this whole global village thing where technology would instantly connect someone in New York with someone in Helsinki.
Yeah, he totally nailed the technology part.
Right, he did. We have the wiring. But what we didn't get was a universal language for the unwritten social rules. Like, we just don't all speak the same underlying code.
Which is exactly our mission for you today. We are taking a deep dive into the mechanics of intercultural communication, drawing on Xuanglu's really comprehensive work, introducing intercultural communication.
It's a fantastic source.
It really is. And we want to shortcut your way to becoming a highly competent global citizen and professional without you getting bogged down by, massive information overload.
Right, no textbooks needed today.
Exactly. We are extracting the core models, the workplace indicators, and the strategies for navigating cultural friction.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Why is it so incredibly easy for us to misunderstand someone from another culture, even when, everyone in the room has the best intentions?
Well, it really comes down to socialization.
Right.
We acquire our cultural beliefs, our values, and our communication norms at a completely unconscious level right from childhood.
Unconscious being the key word there.
Right. We are effectively programmed to view the world through one specific set of culturally tinted lenses. And because this happens beneath our conscious awareness, we don't realize we're wearing lenses at all. We just think, oh, this is how the world is.
Exactly. We assume we are seeing objective reality. So when we bump into someone wearing a different pair of lenses, our first instinct isn't usually to think, oh, cultural differences.
Right. Our first instinct is, wow, that person is acting so strangely or rudely.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like upgrading the operating system of your brain to read different file formats instead of just assuming the file is corrupted.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like when you encounter that Finnish silence, your default OS says error, bad person. But intercultural competence is the software patch that says, this is just a different file format. Let me decode this.
That's a great way to put it. And the official definition of that software patch, intercultural competence, is basically the ability to communicate effectively and appropriately with people of other cultures.
Appropriately being just as important as effectively?
Totally. But the primary roadblock to installing that patch is ethnocentrism, which is that deeply ingrained belief that your own culture is the central, normal, and superior one. Ethnocentrism forces us to judge everyone else by our own cultural yardstick.
Which, leads inevitably to stereotyping, right?
Exactly. The alternative to this is cultural relativism, where you actively practice judging another culture strictly by its own context.
So you stop asking, why are they doing this weird thing?
Yeah.
And start asking, what cultural assumptions make this behavior make perfect sense to them?
Yes. The source material actually gives a brilliant example of how deep these default settings go with a Japanese proverb. It goes, a single arrow is easily broken, but not 10 in a bundle.
Wow. That tells you everything you need to know about a culture that prizes collectivism, group harmony, and interdependence.
Right. Now, contrast that bundle of arrows with the United States, where a core cultural value is the individual's right to just speak your mind.
Right. The U.S. values assertiveness and directness.
Exactly. In an American context, being indirect is often viewed suspiciously, like maybe you're being evasive or dishonest.
Yeah.
But in Japan, being overly direct and asserting your individual opinion over the group is frequently seen as arrogant or disruptive to the harmony of the group.
So you put the American who values directness and the Japanese professional who values harmony in a room, and the friction is just immediate.
Oh, instant friction.
Which brings us to the environment where these differences don't just cause awkward dinners, but actual systemic failure, which is the workplace.
Right, yeah.
It's fascinating to look at organizations themselves as subcultures, because culture isn't just about geography, It's about shared expectation.
Absolutely.
Like, look at IBM historically. Their culture was famous for dark blue suits, white shirts, conservative ties. It visually and behaviorally demanded unity, conformity, and a very specific top-down management style.
Yeah, and then look at 3M. Their organizational culture was built almost entirely around disruption and innovativeness.
Right. Complete opposites.
Employees who suggested wild, unconventional ideas there were celebrated as heroes. So if you take a manager who spent 20 years thriving in IBM's historical culture of conformity and just drop them into 3M's culture of disruption,
They would completely freak out.
they will experience massive culture shock, even if both companies are in the exact same American state.
That's wild. Now, multiply that complexity by bringing in actual multinational diversity. The text talks about companies like Motorola relying heavily on diverse work groups to drive innovation in their products.
Right, global teams.
But wait, I have to push back here. In the corporate world, we are constantly taught that diverse perspectives automatically lead to better brainstorming and better products.
Yeah.
Are you saying that diversity can actually be a liability?
Well, when people feel culturally threatened in a diverse room, human nature makes them kind of circle the wagons with people who look, sound, or think like them.
Oh, sure.
Researchers call this intergroup conflict. Simply throwing people of different backgrounds into a room does not magically yield better results. Yeah, without the active application of intercultural competence, demographic differences often trigger intense clashes, usually over scarce resources, power, or just the right way to get things done.
So diverse groups can actually strengthen their in-group identities and actively work against the outgroup.
Exact.
So the diversity hardens the divisions rather than blurring them. That is really counterintuitive.
It is, but there is a detailed case study in the text about a Sino-American joint venture in southern China that illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that one.
So the joint venture paired a Chinese manager with an American manager. The Chinese manager's cultural background leaned heavily toward an authoritarian, hierarchical leadership style.
Okay.
He expected to give orders that would be followed without question, but the American manager expected a democratic, participatory decision-making style, where the team's opinions were actively solicited.
Oh, man. It sounds like a recipe for total gridlock. I mean, the American probably thinks he's being this great, inclusive boss.
Right. And the Chinese manager looks at the American, constantly asking his subordinates for their opinions, and assumes the American is an incredibly weak, incompetent leader who just doesn't know what to do.
Yikes.
Meanwhile, the American looks at the Chinese manager barking orders and assumes he is a tyrant who doesn't respect the team.
And the crazy thing is, neither of them is objectively wrong. They're just running completely different leadership software.
Exactly. And unless intercultural competence is actively applied to bridge that specific gap, the diversity of the leadership team actually damages the company.
Okay, so if two managers can be looking at the exact same situation and running completely different software, how do we actually go about updating our own software? I mean, we don't all wake up one day suddenly culturally fluent.
No, definitely not.
Is there a map for how we react to people who are different from us?
There is, actually. Milton Bennett developed a highly regarded framework for mapping this journey called the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity, or DMIS.
DMIS, okay.
Yeah. He theorized that as we become more culturally competent, our experience of cultural difference becomes more complex and nuanced. He mapped this into 6 predictable stages, divided into 2 halves.
Okay, what's the first half?
The first half consists of the ethnocentric stages, where our own culture remains the center of reality.
Right, and the first of those ethnocentric stages is denial, where a person literally just doesn't notice cultural differences, or they isolate themselves to avoid them entirely.
Exactly.
Then comes defense, where you notice the differences, but they feel like a threat. You divide the world into us versus them, and of course, us is clearly superior.
Classic defense stage.
But here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. The third stage, the final ethnocentric one, is minimization. And I really struggle to understand how someone moves past minimization.
That's a tricky one.
Because minimization is when you say things like, deep down we are all just human, or we are all the same underneath.
Right.
I mean, if I already think everyone is equal, why isn't that the finish line? It feels like you've solved prejudice.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, minimization sounds incredibly progressive. But Bennett categorizes it as ethnocentric because by insisting everyone is exactly the same, you are inevitably assuming everyone is exactly the same as you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you are projecting your own cultural values onto the rest of the world and assuming they are universal.
That makes so much sense. So erasing real profound cultural differences because dealing with them is too complicated is actually a subtle form of centering your own experience.
Precisely. To move past that, you have to cross over into the second half of Bennett's model, which are the ethno-relative stages.
This is where you actually start judging things
Yeah.
based on context.
Right. The fourth stage overall, and the first ethno-relative one, is acceptance. You don't have to adopt or even agree with another culture's values, but you accept that their way of organizing the world is just as valid and complex as yours.
Okay.
Then the fifth stage is adaptation, where you develop the ability to intentionally shift your perspective and change your behavior to communicate effectively in another culture.
And the final stage is integration. This is where you effortlessly weave different cultural worldviews into your own identity.
Exactly. You are no longer just visiting another culture. You are integrating multiple perspectives into a cohesive sense of self.
But it's one thing to mentally reach that integration stage on a chart. What does that actually look like physically?
Like in practice.
Yeah. How does a bicultural brain actually tell the body what to do in a stressful new environment?
Well, Brian Spitzberg and William Kupak tackled the actual anatomy of this competence. They broke intercultural communication down into 4 specific domains:
Okay, what are they?
knowledge, affective, psychomotor, and situational. Let's imagine an expatriate moving from Australia to Thailand.
Okay, good example.
The first domain, knowledge, is just the data. The expat needs to know that in Australia, ruffling a child's hair or showing the soles of your shoes while sitting is totally normal.
Right.
But in Thailand, the head is sacred and the feet are the lowest part of the body. Doing those exact same physical actions is deeply offensive.
But knowing the rules isn't enough, right? Because when you step out into the streets of Bangkok, you are hit with the second domain, which is the affective component.
Yes, the emotional side.
Right. Traveling or dealing with a new culture is incredibly stressful. You have to manage your fear of the unknown, tolerate ambiguity, and just handle the uncertainty of not immediately understanding the cues around you.
It's exhausting.
And if your effective response is to just panic or get angry when a meeting doesn't go the way you expect, all that cultural knowledge you memorize basically goes out the window.
Exactly. And that's why you also need the third domain, which is psychomotor. This is the physical translation of your knowledge and emotions into actual executed behavior.
So like actually doing the thing.
Right. It is one thing to know you should perform a traditional Thai greeting, the way. It is another thing entirely to physically execute it with the correct posture and hand placement so it doesn't look mocking or awkward.
Yeah, that would be bad. And the final piece of the puzzle is the situational domain, understanding the specific context.
Super important.
Because what is appropriate at a formal business dinner in Bangkok might be totally inappropriate at a street food market with local friends.
Absolutely.
I was thinking about how these 4 domains interact, and it's exactly like learning to drive in a foreign country.
Oh, how so?
Well, to make this stick for you listening, knowledge is knowing they drive on the left side of the road in this new country.
Okay.
Affective is managing your emotions like not hyperventilating when you approach a massive, chaotic roundabout.
Right, staying calm.
Psychomotor is the actual physical act of shifting gears with your left hand instead of your right while steering. And situational is understanding the unwritten local rules, knowing exactly when it's culturally appropriate to honk your horn to say hello and when honking will start a fistfight.
That is a perfect analogy. You can have a perfect grasp of the local traffic laws, but if your psychomotor skills fail and you shift into the wrong gear, you crash.
Exactly.
The domains really have to work in tandem.
So we want to be the perfect driver, right? But when an expat actually moves to a new culture, what determines the speed of that adaptation? I always picture adaptation as just a chart going up, like you arrive, you're confused, and every single day you just get a little more integrated.
Yeah, I think a lot of people picture it that way, but the reality is far more turbulent. The communication scholar Young-Wai Kim visualizes this adaptation process not as a smooth upward line, but as a coiled spring.
A coiled spring.
Yeah, she calls it the stress adaptation growth model.
I really love that image.
It's very accurate. You stretch out the spring by taking a risk in the new culture. Maybe you try to run a meeting in the host language, or you try to navigate a complex social custom.
Okay, you're stretching it.
Right, and the stretching causes internal stress. Often you make a mistake or you feel totally overwhelmed, and the spring violently recoils. You pull back into your comfort zone to protect your ego and just recharge.
That sounds incredibly relatable.
But here's the key. Every time you stretch out and recoil, the spring moves forward slightly. You grow. It is a continuous dynamic cycle of stress and adaptation.
So what external factors determine how violently that spring recoils?
Well, the first major factor is the similarity between the host and home cultures. If you move from New Zealand to Australia, your psychological and cultural distance is very small. The stress is minimal.
Yeah.
But if you move from Sudan to Australia, the cultural distance in language, values, and visual appearance is massive, which significantly increases acculturation stress.
Makes sense.
Another crucial factor is ethnic social support.
I found that part of the source material fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because there is this common assumption that if an immigrant spends all their time with the community of their own background in the new country, they're basically failing to integrate.
A very common misconception, yeah.
But the research suggests this ethnic network actually provides a vital initial cushion. It gives the person a safe space to retreat to, letting the spring recoil safely while they build the psychological strength to negotiate the mainstream culture.
Precisely. And personal background plays a huge role as well. Your age, your proficiency in the host language, and how much previous exposure you've had to other cultures all dictate how smoothly you stretch that spring.
Right.
But regardless of your background, the text brings up two major actionable strategies to smooth out the process: overcoming prejudice and developing deep empathy.
Overcoming prejudice sounds kind of obvious, but the text makes a profound point about why prejudice exists in the first place.
It really does.
We usually just think of prejudice as a moral failing,
Okay.
but psychologically, prejudice serves a knowledge function. It provides a very convenient, albeit totally inaccurate way for our tired brains to organize a really complex world.
Right, it is a cognitive shortcut. And overcoming it requires active, conscious work to bypass that shortcut. You have to force your brain to take the long way around, which requires empathy.
Like actually trying to project yourself into the other person's position and experiencing their reality.
Yes, and if we can take this to the bigger picture, the ultimate goal of doing this work is to reach a state where you are truly bicultural.
Okay.
Studies by Benet Martinez look at people who have highly integrated bicultural identities, like Asian Americans who feel deeply connected to both cultures. These individuals develop the ability to engage in cultural frame switching.
Cultural frame switching. So what does that switching look like in practice?
Well, they subconsciously monitor their environment for cues. If they are exposed to positive cues associated with their Asian heritage, perhaps talking with family or attending a specific cultural event, they seamlessly shift their interpretive frame.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they respond in ways that are culturally congruent for that setting. But if the context shifts an hour later to an American corporate boardroom, they switch frames again.
That is amazing.
They don't lose who they are. Their brain's operating system simply recognizes the new file format and runs the correct software instantly.
That is the absolute pinnacle of Bennett's integration stage. Just fluidly moving between realities without dropping the connection.
Exactly. It is the physical and mental embodiment of intercultural competence.
Well, we have covered massive ground today. We started by defining what intercultural competence actually is and why our unconscious ethnocentric settings inevitably trip us up.
Right.
We looked at how this plays out in the workplace, how simply throwing diverse people together without competence creates intergroup conflict over resources rather than sparking innovation.
Yeah, that IBM and 3M comparison.
Exactly. And we mapped our own sensitivity journey using Bennett's 6 stages, realizing that erasing differences through minimization is actually a roadblock to true integration.
A very subtle roadblock.
Very. We also learned that to drive in this new territory, we need knowledge, affective tolerance, psychomotor skills, and situational awareness all working together. And finally, we saw how adaptation is a coiled spring of stress and growth cushioned by social support, ultimately leading to the ability to switch cultural frames. So, what does this all mean?
It means that in a world where geographic boundaries no longer limit our daily communications, your ability to thrive is dependent on your willingness to realize that your way of seeing the world is just one way.
Yeah.
Whether you are leading a multinational corporate team or simply traveling abroad, competence isn't about giving up your own culture. It is about adding interpretive tools to your toolkit so you can build bridges instead of walls.
Which brings me to one final deeply provocative thought I want you to mull over as you go about your week.
Let's hear it.
The text mentions a theory called cultural schemas, the invisible mental models we use to make sense of the world. In Aboriginal English, the word walk is deeply inextricably tied to concepts of extended family and kinship.
Right.
When they say walk, it triggers an entire cultural map of solidarity, identity, and social obligation. But if you speak Australian English, the exact same word, walk, just means exercise or getting from point A to point B. It's just transport.
Two groups of people using the exact same four-letter word in English, but experiencing two completely different realities.
Exactly. So look at the words you are using every single day. Look at the reactions you have to your colleagues, your friends, the news. How much of your daily reality do you think is objectively true? And how much is just a local software program you didn't even realize your brain was running? Because once you realize you're wearing culturally tinted lenses, you finally have the power to take them off and try on a different pair.